My name is Ethan Thorne, I'm 52, and I'm a criminal defense attorney in New York. For over 2 decades, I built a solid reputation defending complex cases and what seemed like a perfect life with Sarah, my wife, and Mark Johnson, my partner and best friend for 15 years. We were Manhattan's golden trio. Sarah, elegant and charming, shined at the firm's social events. Mark, a brilliant strategist, was my right-hand man in the toughest courtrooms. I was the brain behind the big wins, the provider of a luxurious life that included our Upper East Side penthouse and our summer home in the Hamptons. My analytical and observant nature, honed by years of reading people in jury rooms, had always served me well. I never imagined these same skills would become my salvation from unthinkable betrayal. Everything changed on an October day. During an important hearing, I felt an overwhelming headache. Words jumbled in my mind. Within hours, I was at Presbyterian Hospital receiving the diagnosis that would change everything. Glioblastoma multiforme, an aggressive brain cancer. The doctors were direct. 6 months, maybe less. The tumor was growing rapidly, affecting my mobility and speech. In weeks, I went from a ruthless attorney to a man trapped in his own body, dependent on constant care. Sarah proved to be the devoted wife. She hired private nurses, transformed our bedroom into a mini hospital, talked about fighting together. Mark took over my most important cases, visited daily, talked about keeping everything running until you get back. But I noticed things, small anomalies that my mind, trained to detect lies, picked up even through the haze of medication. Sarah asked specific questions about my wills and insurance policies with unusual frequency. "Darling, I just want to make sure everything's organized," she'd say, flipping through documents I had never asked her to review. Mark showed sudden interest in my offshore investments, accounts I kept private even from him. "Ethan, if anything happens, I need to know where all the assets are to protect Sarah," he'd argue during his visits. My lawyer's intuition, sharpened by decades of reading criminals, flashed red alerts. Something was wrong, but the progression of the disease made me increasingly limited in my ability to act. Fortunately, months before the diagnosis, following a professional paranoia I'd developed over the years, I had taken precautions. I transferred most of my assets to an irrevocable trust with specific bad faith and attempted fraud clauses that automatically disinherited beneficiaries who tried to harm me. Control remained with Robert Davies, my oldest partner, and the only one I trusted completely. I had also installed a discreet recording system at home and in the office. As the disease progressed, I managed to get a special eye-tracking laptop that allowed me to communicate by text. Sarah and Mark thought it was just for my last words, but secretly, I was recording their conversations and movements. The truth revealed itself on a February morning that should have been special. It was Valentine's Day, and Sarah had prepared a romantic breakfast in my room. She and Mark were there, believing I was in a catatonic state, just a vegetable awaiting the end. That's when I heard the words that would confirm my worst fears and seal their fate. Sarah whispered to Mark, "He won't last much longer. The doctor said the tumor is growing faster than we expected." Her voice carried a chill I had never heard before. Mark quietly replied, "Perfect. Did you get the access documents for the offshore accounts?" "Yes, but we need to be careful. Robert Davies has been asking questions about Ethan's financial movements," Sarah murmured, adjusting my pillow with a false tenderness that nauseated me. "Don't worry about Davies, he's old and trusts me. I already have the necessary forged powers of attorney," Mark said, his voice revealing a sinister satisfaction. "And the nurse I hired will help with the medication. An extra dose of morphine to ease his suffering, you understand?" My body was paralyzed, but my mind had never been clearer. Every word was like a punch to the gut, but also a piece of evidence I was mentally recording. Sarah continued, "How much time do you think we have? I need to know when we can get married. I'm tired of pretending I love him." "A few weeks at most. The neurologist I bribed will sign the death certificate when she gives the overdose. Natural death from cancer complications. No one will suspect," Mark replied with the coldness of someone planning a murder. The initial fear turned into a cold, calculating fury. They weren't just financially betraying me. They were planning to kill me. Over the next few days, I pretended to get worse while secretly documenting their every move. My eye tracking system allowed me to send short text messages to Robert Davies without them noticing. The first message was simple. Rob, activate Judas protocol, urgent. Robert had been my partner for 20 years. He knew exactly what that meant. It was our code for internal fraud, developed after we saw several colleagues betrayed by close associates. Within 48 hours, Robert had frozen all my accounts and activated the trust protection clauses. Sarah and Mark tried to access the offshore funds and were blocked. The powers of attorney Mark had forged were invalidated by a biometric verification system I had secretly implemented. Their reaction was immediate and desperate. Sarah came to my room that night, crying fake tears. "Ethan, darling, there's some problem with our accounts. The banks are saying everything's frozen. Can you help me sort this out?" I blinked once, our code for no. Mark arrived an hour later, visibly nervous. "Ethan, buddy, it seems there's been some misunderstanding with your investments. Robert's being very protective. Maybe you can talk to him?" Again, I blinked once. Their situation quickly worsened. The nurse Mark had bribed, a woman named Linda Morrison, tried to administer an extra dose of morphine, but was prevented by Janet, my loyal nurse, who had been instructed by Robert to monitor all medication. "Sorry, Linda, but only I administer medication to Mr. Thorne." "Those are specific doctor's orders," Janet said firmly, taking the syringe from Linda's hands. Linda left the room visibly perturbed. Through the cameras I had installed, I saw her calling Mark. "There's a problem. The other nurse won't let me give the extra medication, and I think she suspects something." The pressure on Sarah and Mark intensified when Robert began to investigate officially. He had hired a private investigator and uncovered not only the attempted fraud, but also evidence of their extramarital affair that dated back to before my diagnosis. During a visit, I heard Sarah plead on the phone, "Mark, we need a plan B. Ethan's doing better than we expected, and that damn nurse won't leave his side." It was true. Ironically, my determination to survive to see them pay was giving me unexpected strength. Doctors commented on my surprising recovery and exceptional will to live. Mark replied with growing desperation, "We have to speed everything up. If he makes a full recovery, we're finished." But it was already too late. Robert had gathered enough evidence and was ready for the final blow. Robert executed the plan with a surgeon's precision. On a Tuesday morning, he arrived at my home accompanied by 2 NYPD detectives and a court officer carrying search and seizure warrants. Sarah was having coffee when they rang the doorbell. I heard her trembling voice. "Can you explain what's going on?" "Mrs. Thorne, we have a warrant for the seizure of documents related to suspected fraud and attempted homicide against your husband," Detective Morrison said in a firm voice. The sound of footsteps climbing the stairs echoed through the house. Sarah rushed to my room, feigning concern. "Ethan, darling, the police are here. There's been some terrible misunderstanding." Robert entered right behind her, carrying a laptop. "Hello, Ethan. I brought something to show the detectives." He connected the laptop to a sound system. "I thought it might be interesting to hear some recordings you made." Sarah's face went pale as she recognized her own voice coming from the speakers. "He won't last much longer. I'm already tired of pretending I love him." Then Mark's voice. "The nurse I hired will help with the medication, an extra dose of morphine." Sarah tried to turn off the equipment, but the court officer stopped her. "This doesn't mean anything. Ethan is delirious because of the cancer. He's making things up." "Actually, Mrs. Thorne," Robert said calmly, "these recordings were made by an automated system your husband installed months before the diagnosis. He was in perfect mental health when he programmed everything." Mark arrived 20 minutes later, finding the house surrounded by police cars. He tried to flee but was arrested in the building's parking lot. When they brought him into the house in handcuffs, his arrogance had completely vanished. "Ethan, you don't understand," he pleaded, being forced to kneel beside my bed. "It was just talk. We weren't going to do anything." Sarah was emotional. She talked nonsense. Robert played more recordings, including the phone conversations with Linda Morrison, the corrupt nurse, who had already been arrested in her apartment in Queens. "We have 2 weeks of audio, Mark," Robert said coldly. "Detailed discussions about morphine dosages, bribing doctors, falsifying documents. You planned everything meticulously." The eye-tracking system allowed me to send a message that Robert read aloud. "You made the mistake of underestimating a criminal defense attorney. I've spent 30 years studying people like you." Sarah broke down in tears, but not of genuine remorse. It was the despair of someone watching their life crumble. "Ethan, please, I love you. I was confused, afraid of losing you." Mark tried a different approach. "Buddy, we can sort this out between friends. You know I would never really hurt you." "It was just talk." Robert smiled coldly. "Gentlemen, do us a favor. Don't insult the intelligence of a man who defended smarter criminals than you for 3 decades. The detectives found additional devastating evidence. In Mark's office, they discovered falsified powers of attorney, emails detailing the fund transfer plan, and even Google searches for morphine overdose symptoms and how to speed up cancer death. On Sarah's phone, they found messages to a real estate agent about selling our house as soon as my husband passes away, and conversations with a wedding planner about a discreet wedding for the end of the year. Linda Morrison, under interrogation, confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. She revealed that Mark had promised her $50,000 to administer the fatal overdose, and that Sarah had personally chosen the day, Valentine's Day, to add a romantic touch to the end of the story. The irony was delicious. They had chosen Valentine's Day for my death, but it was precisely on that day that they sealed their own conviction with their recorded confessions. During the investigation process, something unexpected happened to me. Perhaps it was the adrenaline of revenge, or the determination to see them pay, but my condition began to stabilize. Doctors spoke of partial remission and exceptional response to experimental treatment. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, my neurologist, was perplexed. "Ethan, your tests show an improvement that defies all medical logic. The tumor is regressing, and your neurological function is restoring." Sarah and Mark, obviously, were terrified by my recovery. During the bail hearings, I saw them look at me with growing horror as I slowly regained my speech and mobility. At the first hearing, I managed to whisper a few words to the judge. They tried to kill me. My voice was weak, but each word cut through the courtroom's silence like a blade. Their defense attorney tried to argue that my accusations were the result of mental confusion caused by cancer, but the evidence was overwhelming. Besides the recordings, we had forged documents, bank records, Linda Morrison's testimony, and even evidence that Mark had researched my $3 million life insurance policy. The prosecutor, James Wright, an old courtroom acquaintance, was relentless. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have before us not just a case of marital betrayal, but a cold and calculated conspiracy to murder a man at his most vulnerable moment." The media turned the case into a national sensation. Headlines like "Lawyer Outsmarts Murder Plot from Deathbed" and "Cancer Patient Exposes Wife's Deadly Conspiracy" dominated New York newspapers. Sarah and Mark tried to hire the best criminal defense attorneys in the city, but ironically, many of them knew me professionally and refused to represent them. The few who accepted quickly realized it was a lost cause. The federal investigation expanded when they discovered that Mark had used firm accounts to finance the murder plot. The FBI took over parts of the case, adding charges of money laundering and tax fraud. Each day brought new, humiliating revelations. They discovered that Sarah had consulted a divorce attorney 6 months before my diagnosis, exploring ways to get hold of my assets. They found emails between her and Mark dating back a year, discussing ways to get rid of Ethan to be together. During this period, my recovery continued to surprise the doctors. Gradually, I regained mobility on my right side, my speech became clearer, and I was able to walk again with the aid of a cane. The first time I walked into the courtroom, leaning only on my cane, I saw the absolute despair on Sarah and Mark's faces. They had gambled everything on my death, and now they saw me resurrected like a vengeful ghost. The trial was a spectacle of justice that lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day, with journalists from the New York Times, CNN, and local networks documenting every moment. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand without assistance. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sarah quietly wept at the defense table while Mark completely avoided my gaze. "Mr. Thorne," Prosecutor Wright began, "can you tell us in your own words what you heard on Valentine's Day?" My voice, still hoarse but firm, echoed through the courtroom. I heard my wife and my best friend planning my murder. I heard them discussing when I would die, how they would divide my assets, and even which nurse they hired to give me a fatal overdose. The jury listened in absolute silence. We played the recordings in full. The coldness in Sarah and Mark's voices, planning my death as if they were discussing a dinner menu, shocked everyone. During cross-examination, Sarah's lawyer tried to discredit me. "Mr. Thorne, don't you think it's possible that the cancer medications affected your perception of reality?" I smiled for the first time in months. "Counselor, I spent 25 years in this very courtroom defending people accused of crimes. If there's one thing I know how to do, it's distinguish reality from fantasy. And the reality is you have 2 murderers sitting right there." Mark finally broke during his own testimony. Under pressure from the prosecutor, he confessed, "Yes, we planned everything, but it was Sarah's idea. She said he was going to die anyway, that we were just accelerating the inevitable." Sarah screamed from the defense table, "You're a liar. You were the one who suggested the extra morphine." They turned on each other like rats on a sinking ship. It was exactly what I expected. Criminals always betray each other when the pressure mounts. The physical evidence was devastating. Linda Morrison had recorded conversations with Mark on her cell phone. We had emails detailing bank transfers, searches for poisons, and even a draft of the obituary Sarah had written for me weeks before the attempted murder. The obituary was particularly cruel. She had written, "Ethan Thorne bravely fought cancer, but succumbed peacefully at home, surrounded by love." The word love made me nauseous. During the sentencing phase, I made a final statement that was widely publicized by the media. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, throughout my career, I have defended hundreds of criminals. Some were guilty, others innocent. But I have never encountered such calculated coldness as I witnessed in my own home. These individuals not only planned to kill me, they planned to profit from my death while pretending to love me." The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, falsification of documents, and money laundering. Sarah was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Mark received 30 years for being considered the mastermind of the plan. Linda Morrison got 8 years for her cooperation, but the true justice came later. Sarah and Mark lost absolutely everything. Their homes, cars, bank accounts, everything was confiscated to pay legal costs and damages. Their reputations were completely destroyed. Mark was disbarred by the New York State Bar Association. Sarah had to sell even her jewelry to pay her lawyers. They became social pariahs, mentioned only as examples of betrayal and greed. As for me, my recovery continued to defy all medical expectations. 6 months after the trial, I returned to work part-time. My experience transformed me into a recognized expert in family fraud crimes and attempted murders by beneficiaries. I wrote a book about my experience, Trust No One: How I Survived Cancer and Murder. It became a New York Times bestseller and led me to a new career as a motivational speaker. I established the Ethan Thorne Foundation for brain cancer research and legal support for victims of family fraud. To date, we have helped over 200 families who have gone through similar situations. 3 years after the trial, Robert visited me in the office with news about Sarah and Mark. They were serving their sentences in different prisons, without any contact with each other. Sarah had gained 90 pounds and worked in the laundry at Bedford Hills Women's Prison. Mark had been assaulted by other inmates and lived in isolation at Sing Sing Prison. "They asked about you," Robert said. They wanted to know if you still thought about them. I smiled. Tell them yes. Every time I see justice being served, every time I help a family protect themselves from predators, every time I wake up alive another day, they will forever be part of my survival story. Today, 5 years later, I am in complete remission. I remarried Dr. Patricia Hendricks, my neurologist, who accompanied me throughout the entire journey. We have a modest home in Westchester and spend weekends helping other cancer patients. Sarah and Mark are still in prison. Their names have become synonymous with betrayal in New York's legal community. They gambled on my death and lost their own lives in the process. The best revenge truly is living well, and I live knowing that justice, when served with intelligence and patience, is a dish that never gets cold. If this story touched you in any way, if you know someone who went through a similar betrayal, or if you simply believe that justice always prevails, please like this video. Share it with people who need to know that it's possible to survive the worst betrayals. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of overcoming adversity and righteous revenge. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever been in a situation where you had to use your intelligence to protect yourself from people close to you? Your stories can inspire others who are going through difficult times. See you in the next story, and remember, never underestimate the power of a prepared mind.